All righty. Well, welcome everybody to my first ever author interview moment. We could call it Book Nook. I'll think of a name later. But I am joined today by author Aamna Qureshi. And actually, did I pronounce that right? Qureshi?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, beautiful. Author of The Lady or the Lion, which is coming out this month, July 20th. If you haven't pre-ordered it already, do so. It's beautiful. And also When a Brown Girl Flees, which is coming out in 2023, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, so Anna, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and about your upcoming novel?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to discuss my book with you. So my name is Aamna Qureshi. I'm the author of The Lady or the Lion, which is a young adult fantasy set in a Pakistan-inspired world featuring a Desi princess, forbidden romance, and court intrigues, and lots of complicated politics. To find out more, you'll have to read it.
Perfect. Oh, so exciting. And it's based on the fairy tale or the short story, The Lady or the Tiger.
Yes,
Right?
so it's based off of this short story, The Lady or the Tiger by Frank R. Stockton. A lot of people actually are confused if it actually is based on that because the titles are different. But I just changed the title because I love alliterations. I thought The Lady or the Lion sounded better than The Lady or the Tiger. But so it is a retelling of the short story. And while the short story is, I believe it's only 4 to 5 pages, my novel is a bit much more in depth than the short story is. And it really delves into the main plot points discussed in the short story. And the main thing of the short story is that it's set in this country where the justice system is sort of hinged on this trial where the accused is brought in front of 2 doors. Behind one door is a lady and behind the other is a tiger. And the accused basically gets to choose their own fate. If they choose the door with the lady, that means they're innocent. They get to marry the lady, live happily ever after. But if they're guilty, they go to the door with the tiger, and the tiger tears them apart. So I was really intrigued by this concept, and I had a lot of fun retelling it for my own story.
Beautiful. Oh, I mean, that's one way to decide your fate, hey?
Yeah, definitely.
And so I thought today we would focus mostly on talking about fairy tales, retellings, and their place in young adult fantasy. So to start us off, what is it that really drew you to this story?
So what drew me to the story was definitely the ending. I don't want to spoil anything, but the ending is very, I think, it evokes a lot of emotions out of readers because you really don't know what the ending is going to be. So I was really intrigued by that, and I was really compelled by what the princess would choose. So the main sort of story of the short story is that the princess's lover is sent to one of these trials, and she finds out what is behind which door. And the end of the short story is that she has to send her lover to one of the doors. So you sort of don't know whether, she's going to send him to get married to someone else, or is she going to just send him to his death as a sort of, if I can't have him, no one can. So I was really interested by that. But even when I was reading, I felt like I really wanted to know a lot more about the princess herself, even though the story revolves around her decision and that's sort of the main crux of the story. You don't really learn a lot about her in the short story. So that was something that I was really interested in developing further.
Oh, interesting. And you did such a good job giving her such a voice too, because you're right, it's her decision that determines the fate of this man.
Yeah,
And yet
definitely.
in the original story, all you really hear about her is that she doesn't like the woman that's behind door number 1 or 2, depending on
Yeah,
where
she's
they are.
basically reduced to this jealous emotion, which I thought was a disservice to her.
Mm-hmm. And so then what elements from that original tale were important for you to keep in your retelling?
So I think for me as a writer, I think a lot of times I struggle a lot with plot, sort of like the bare bones of the plot. I have a lot of fun with characters and character developments and love stories and even world building I don't find super difficult. But a lot of times those major plot points I have difficulty with. So with retellings, it's sort of like a cheat where the plot is already there for you to steal. So those are the things that I definitely kept intact from the short story. But of course, because the short story is so short and I was writing a full-length novel, I had to still come up with a lot more plot. But I think the bare bones of that plot really helped me with my journey writing this story. And I think I made one big difference between the short story and my novel towards the ending of my novel, which is really subtle. I think if you don't pay attention to the short story very carefully, you won't notice it, but it is a very significant difference.
And I've had the pleasure of reading your novel. I won't say any spoilers, but I definitely noticed that change, and it changed the game. It was like, oh, no. Oh, so good. So then what elements did you want to make sure you changed or omitted or even improved on from the original?
I think the main thing that I wanted to change was about the princess, about her autonomy, about her character. In the short story, we really don't learn a lot about her, and I feel like she's not really three-dimensional. So that was something that I really wanted to focus on in my novel, to really make her a really complex, three-dimensional, like fully fleshed out character. And I think a big part of that is also that she has, I think, some flaws as well. And she definitely struggles in her journey. And sometimes I think even as a reader or a writer, you get a little bit frustrated with her and how she's behaving, what she's feeling, things like that. But I really wanted her to be as genuine as possible and to feel really human and real.
Amazing. And did you have any real life women in your life who inspired her?
It's a good question. I think I'm just inspired by everyone all the time. I think a lot of her came from even myself or my family members or just anyone I interact with. I love noticing like little quirks about people or little ways that they react or little things that they go through. So I think I just did a little medley of all of that to create her. I think I will say a lot of her definitely was inspired by myself because I'm also a very emotional person, as our protagonist is. So in a lot of those situations when she does react very dramatically or emotionally, I think that's how I want to react in my head to a lot of things, but I try to keep a cool lid on myself. But because she's sort of this very spoiled princess, sort of like the apple of her grandparents' eyes, she has that leeway to, you know, be really dramatic and sort of overreact and do whatever she wants.
Oh, for sure. Well, and it gives it a bit of spice of life too, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. And so then thinking about fairy tales, original stories versus retellings, what are some of your favorite tropes in that more, you know, the fairy tale short story genre?
Yeah, so I love fairy tales. I love, you know, the fantastical worlds, the sort of lush settings, all these sweeping romances. I think what I also really love about fairy tales is how not everything has to make sense or how everything doesn't really have to work out. There's always these little riddles and these rules to the world that you sort of just accept, even if they don't make sense. So with the short story, The Lady or the Tiger, you know, this concept of this trial being the entire justice system, that these people's, you know, fates are.
Oh, I think I've lost your audio. I'm not sure.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good.
I just heard up to the justice system.
Okay, yeah. So the justice system of the short story, it might seem a little bit ridiculous or, I don't know, crazy, but sort of in the context of a fairy tale, I think you as a reader just accept it. So I like that fairy tales have those little riddles and those little things that readers just accept and go along with. But I think my favorite part about fairy tales has to be the romance and true love.
For sure. And you can so see that when you're writing about your two main characters and their love interest. Which, did you have any inspiration for their love? It's not really a love triangle, but there is a bit of intrigue. It's not a straight line kind of romance.
Yeah, definitely. So for the dynamic between Durkane, our protagonist, and one of the other characters, Asfandiar, who's a foreign ambassador, For their dynamic, I think I was really inspired by sort of the classic dynamic of Lizzie and Darcy from Pride and Prejudice, just because Lizzie, you know, she's really firm in her beliefs. She thinks she's always right. She's really proud. And then Darcy sort of comes along and shows her that, you know, maybe she's not always right. And he challenges her to reconsider what her perceptions of people and situations are, which I really tried to show with Durkane and Esfandiar. You know, Durkane is this, as I said, she's a spoiled princess. She's used to having her own way. She's used to sort of everything happening according to plan. But then Esfandiar, he's a foreign ambassador. When he comes in, he sort of challenges everything and talks to her in a way that really no one else has talked to her before. And at first it's really infuriating for her, but I think she also does appreciate that he takes her really seriously, because for her, a lot of times it feels like, even though she's so doted upon, a lot of times it does feel like people don't take her seriously. Even though she is the princess of these people, a lot of times, you know, she's not given as much responsibility as she'd like, or she's not given that much of a role. But Esfandiar pushes her to really, you know, seize that role, even if it's not given to her.
I love that. And yeah, you can definitely tell that that's the flavor you were going for. I think there's a moment earlier on where Durkane said something along the lines of, you know, I'm either beloved or, you know, everyone's upset with my decisions. And it's quite, there's like that fickleness of the crowd. So then to have that character like Esfandiar, where he's quite real with her, but he's consistent and he sees her to be this real human, not just someone who's either pleasing him or displeasing him.
Definitely.
Yeah, oh, I love that. And then were there any tropes or kind of story elements that you really wanted to avoid falling into? Or, you know, there's that classic YA line, she released the breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Anything you wanted to make sure you were avoiding in your story?
I don't know actually if that line is in my book. It might be. I feel like that's such a real thing that everyone goes through. So many times we do release breaths we don't realize we're holding.
And it has that tension piece too, right? Yeah.
I don't have any personal qualms about using that line. But I think the main thing I was trying to avoid with, and I talked about it a little bit before, how in the original short story, you know, the princess doesn't have a lot of autonomy. And I feel like that's really true in a lot of fairy tales. These princess characters or female characters, number one, they're very few. There's very few female characters in these stories, even though a lot of times the stories sort of revolve around these characters. But even so, they're not given, you know, a lot of autonomy. They're not given a lot of depth. They're sort of just there for other people to react around or do things on their behalf. So that was something that I really wanted to avoid, where I wanted to have a lot of really strong, complex female characters in my novel and to show a lot of range in that too. And I think sort of in general, I was trying to avoid any like harmful stereotypes or anything like that. I was just really conscious of everything I was writing. And of course, because it's, you know, inspired by Pakistan and I'm a Pakistani American and I really drew on a lot of my culture and things like that. I am aware that there's a lot of, I think, harmful media revolving around Pakistan or really a lot of Eastern countries in general. So I really wanted to avoid a lot of those negative stereotypes. And I know one really big negative stereotype is that, you know, in these Eastern countries, they like treat women really badly and that, you know, women don't have any, they're not in any positions of power. They don't have any autonomy, things like that, which is the opposite of what I show in my book. You know, there's so many strong women who are in varying positions of power that I really enjoyed writing.
Oh, totally. And I think too, you really hit the nail on the head with this novel where, I mean, we've got this really complex main character who you just fall in love with because, like you say, she is flawed, but she's just trying to do the right thing. And also her education has been such where she's not really been told no a lot. And so then she's starting to be told no and figuring out how to deal with that. But then her side characters and the support kind of crew that she relies on are all so different and they have such strong voices too.
Oh, I'm glad that came across.
That was beautiful.
Thank
and then because you mentioned too just the cultural influence that you got from your upbringing and also from your culture. So I definitely noticed, one, I couldn't read your book when I was hungry because your descriptions of food were just gorgeous, but the settings and the clothing were also richly described. So how much would you say you drew from actual experience, and then how much would you say you embellished and added your own flair to?
I think I'd say about like 60-40, like 60% my own experience, 40% I embellished. I think a lot of, the food descriptions, things like that. I think in Pakistani culture, it's very common to, serve a lot of food, to serve these really like extravagant dishes. Even I know like my mom, whenever we have people over, even if it's just like one family or two, she's like, I have to make like at least 4 to 5 different dishes. Or, if we're going to like a family wedding or something like that, everyone gets super dressed up. And I love all of those aspects. And I think the Pakistani culture has such like, number one, such amazing, yummy food, and then also like such beautiful clothing. I love Pakistani fashion. So I definitely had a lot of fun incorporating those two aspects into the storyline. Because, as a princess, Durkhane, of course, she has access to all of these things. I might not always have an excuse to get that dressed up, but as a princess, that's sort of what's expected of her. And another important thing that I wanted to show with the fashion as well was that, even though Durkhane is really feminine, she loves dressing up, she places a lot of importance on these things. It doesn't make her any less of a strong character. I think that's really important because a lot of times in the young adult genre, it's sort of one or the other. Like you're either the really pretty, feminine, sort of mean character, or you don't care about fashion at all, and then you're the strong character. But I wanted to show her as both of those things, and also how they interconnect, because there's actually some scenes where she has, little weapons like hidden in her jewelry or things like that. So I had fun with that.
Oh, totally. And you're so right. And I think that links back to the comment you made earlier, where the emotion and the emotional aspect you gave to Durkhane is really important, because it doesn't show her as weak. It just shows her as human. And I think you're right. A lot of the times we have that clear divide of, we need to either masculinize our female characters to make them appear strong, or else we're going to up the ante with their femininity and then they're going to be weak. But you can wear pretty dresses, you can wear your crown with pride, but also be really strong and a powerful leader. And I think you portrayed that really well with Durkhane.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And my last question, you kind of touched on it with what made it easier, but what was most challenging when you were working with an existing text?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think what was difficult for me working with this text was that a lot of times I wanted it to be more detailed where it wasn't. In some aspects, it was good that, the short story didn't have a lot to it, so that I could embellish and fill in things on my own. But really, when I originally set about to write this story, in my head, the main thing that I had was the characters and a lot of the romance, things like that. But I didn't want this book to strictly be a romance, because I know a lot of people are interested in both like a romantic element and then also like a political intrigue element. So I wanted to include both of those, because I think it makes a more compelling story, especially when those two interact with one another. But because the short story doesn't really delve into any of those politics or anything really about the nation or sort of the king's rule or things like that, what I did have difficulty was with coming up with that whole, like, what are the politics, what are the conflicts going on in this nation and neighboring nations? What does really the whole world look like? So that was difficult for me, but then I sort of figured it out.
Oh yeah, and your descriptions of the mountaintops that she overlooks in her kingdom is just so beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Actually, do you have a copy of the book you can show?
I do. So this is, I don't know if the light is like glaring on it. Okay, so this is a copy, and the paint, it's a whole wraparound painting, which I love. And I actually got the painting commissioned by this Pakistani painter, Asrar Faruqi, whose work I've been following for a while, and I absolutely loved it. And then the team at CamCat was so great, where I pitched this idea to them. I was like, oh, I really love this Pakistani painter. Would we be able to commission a painting for the book cover? They were like, yeah, definitely. So I had really great contact with this painter. I sort of described to him the story and what I was looking for, and he did such an incredible job. I really barely gave him any instruction. I was like, oh, it's like set in like the mountains, like there's a valley and like there's a white palace. But that was basically all I told him. And he came up with this like stunning, stunning painting. And then Marianne Apple at ChemCat did the lettering design and this gorgeous golden border around the edge. So I'm really happy with how it came out.
Amazing. I didn't know it was a painting you commissioned. It is
Yeah.
stunning.
And it's a real painting. Like I have the painting. Like
Yeah.
it's this huge painting that like I own.
Incredible. Oh, that's so special too.
Yeah, definitely.
I love that. Oh my goodness. So yes, definitely get a copy because you can pre-order it now, I believe, and I can put links in wherever you put links so that you can get a pre-order. And I believe it's ebook available as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, July 20th, it
Yes.
hits the shelves.
Yeah.
So exciting.
Very exciting. Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun discussing with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming and taking time out of your day.
Of course.
All righty.